Welcome, everyone, to the Crossroads and Catalyst podcast with Shanita B. I am your host, and this is where we discuss the right perspective at a crossroads and how that can be the catalyst that changes the trajectory of your career. Today, I have a special guest with me. This is Dr. Jalisha Booth, one of my esteemed guests, and I'm so happy to have her here with me today. She has been both in the position of being an employee and an entrepreneur, so I thought that it was really appropriate to have a conversation with her so that she can share her experience with us. What's going on, Jalisha? It's good to see you.
It's good to see you too, and I thank you for having me as your guest this afternoon on the podcast. I love what you're doing, and I think that this is really needed in the workplace right now.
I'm so glad that you're doing this with me. So, as everyone knows, you are my first guest. I have a little bit to learn here about this podcast world, especially in the video casting, as I guess is what we would call it. Uh, I just thought that you would be the perfect inaugural guest so that we can, get this podcast jumping with the interviews. Because I'm not going to be doing interviews every week, but my goal is to bring people on with different backgrounds, different levels of experience to share with people
Right.
that they can have something to encourage them and something to compare to because their circumstances are not particularly unique. We all, I think, share very similar things. They just happen in
Mhm.
different ways. Just my two.
Absolutely.
So I would like to turn it over to you and give you an opportunity to share with us a little bit about who you are and your background.
Well, I'll share a little bit about who I am and my background, but I'll give the cliff notes instead of the movie version, okay? My name is Dr. Jalisha Booth, and I am a native of Oklahoma City. I am currently the founder of the James Booth Foundation, an organization that I started in honor of my late father, James Booth. We invest in student athletes. We do that by providing basketball shoes, offering a food pantry at two local schools, and we also provide sports physical clinics in house at the school 2 to 4 times per year. That is something that's been a labor of love and that I am so thankful to have launched a few years ago. However, that's not my first career. I started off as an environmental scientist and I worked for the state of Oklahoma for several years before making a segue into a general construction business, a general contracting as well. And life will take you on paths that you did not expect them to take you on. And so I ended up working in the nonprofit world, and that inspired me to go ahead and launch my own and found my own nonprofit in honor of my father, of whom I took care of for 12 years prior to that time. And also the family business that I had was the general contracting business. So I have a very colorful background, and I would like some very specific questions of how you'd like me to condense it because I think that I could speak to several areas of concern or just curiosities to your audience by way of entrepreneurship, by way of working for government organizations, NGOs, which are non government organizations, working in the nonprofit sphere. And of course, the key terms nowadays is become self employed. And so I have a little bit of insight into all of those things, as well as contracting and consulting with other organizations. And so I think it is such a nifty background. But this is something that a lot of people don't know about me. And you might know it because you know me. But a
Okay.
lot of people don't know that during the time that I made the leap into entrepreneurship, I was actually a homeschool mom. And that was not popular then. It was, in fact, almost unheard of. Fortunately, COVID has opened up a lot of opportunities to engage in that discussion. But my bottom line is when you want something or even need something, you will make a way.
Yeah, you gave us quite a bit to chew on
Hmm.
there. So right now, you're basically a philanthropist running a foundation in honor of your father.
Yes.
But you started, as a typical American young person. You go to,
Hmm.
you graduate, you get a job,
Yes.
and you got a state job.
Yes.
It just kind of progressed from there. So I
Mm-hmm.
think that that's really interesting. And I'm sure that a lot of people who know you probably didn't know half of the information that you just shared right now and how varied your background is, which probably speaks to why you're so good at so many different things because you've been exposed to a lot.
Thank you.
And
Mm. And
yeah.
I would agree. A lot of people would be surprised to know my full background.
Well, now that we have a little bit of information that underscores who you are and kind of where you've been, excuse me, and what has really laid the foundation for your professional journey, why don't you give us a little bit of information and you know, tell us about a time when you felt like you were at a crossroads in your career.
Oh, that's a great question. One of the times I felt like I was at a crossroads in my career was when I decided to transition out of my environmental science role at the for the state of Oklahoma. And the reason why was because as a young mother, we have to really have a needs assessment. And I would say not only as a young mother, but just throughout our life, we need to perform needs assessments. And at that time, I had small children, I was married, and I just had a lot of moving parts. But what was not doable for me was the travel schedule involved. And I understand that that works for some families, but it didn't work for my family at that time. And so I think it's wise to take an evaluation of how every factor of your employment journey will affect your family life, your mental health, your emotional health, and dare I say, your physical health. So after making that assessment, I thought it is time for that change and eventually transitioned out of that role. And I will say this, it is always good to make sure that whenever you transition out of a role, you do so in the best way possible because you never know when you may have to cross back over those bridges.
Mhm.
And you want to always leave space where if there were a situation where you needed them or they needed you, the lines of communication are still good.
Yeah, so that I think that that's interesting because you listed off a number of things that are important, and I would say at the top of the list is your mental health. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
when you're talking about, being a young person, being a young mother specifically, being married, having those young children, and trying to work full time and handle extracurricular activities or whatever else comes along with being a parent of young
Right.
children, that can be pretty tough. And this is not to say that it can't be done. It
Mm-hmm.
just, what it showcases is that everyone's circumstances are different. There's something slightly different. You being who you are not the same as someone down the road who has slightly different circumstances that, might make more room for them to do something other than what you did or proceed down that same road. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Oh, absolutely. And I feel like everyone's personal convictions and personal biases and even allegiances, they're all varied. And so you have to see what will work for my family because at the end of the day, it's you and your family. However, you still have to make an income. So there's so much weight behind a decision of that significance.
Yeah, and another good thing that you pointed out too is um, maintaining those relationships or leaving on decent terms because you don't want to
Mm-hmm.
bridges unnecessarily.
Mm-hmm.
What this speaks to is the fact that you were able to. It sounds like you were able to leave that position in good standing, and that might not necessarily be everyone's experience or even a lot
Mm-hmm.
of people's experience. They might just be fed up. They might
Absolutely.
it might be one of those jobs where they just feel like if they continue to stay there, they're going to
Mm-hmm.
minds or they're just not going to be in a good place and they're not growing, but they're dying,
Yes.
lack of a better word. And so that's something that we really have to take into consideration as well is when we are confronted with, okay, am I going to be able to handle the workload of being a parent, of
Mm-hmm.
being a spouse, of being an employee? And if I can't, or if I won't,
Yes.
what is the option here that will
Mm-hmm.
to make the right decision? And so it sounds like you really did an assessment, and I would guess that at the time you did that assessment with your spouse,
Yes.
and talked through that to
Yes.
determine what was best for you and your family.
Absolutely. It was a thoughtful consideration and collaborative decision. And I'll tell you, even those connections that I had back then, I'm still in communication with a few people from that particular job to this day. So it's amazing how people will always remember you when you treat them well overall, regardless of circumstance.
Well, it sounds like you made quite the impact. I'm not surprised.
It was good times. I hated to go from there, but I knew it was necessary.
Okay. Well, then tell me this. What was it? What was something that you learned about yourself as you were navigating through that particular crossroad?
Something that I learned about myself from that specific situation was I had to act in faith. I'm a woman of faith, and I make no apologies about that. And I also learned about myself that I was more courageous than I thought I was, because that was such a hefty decision. And I knew that it took a level of boldness and courage just to step out on said faith. And that really made me happy when I realized, hey, I can do this. A lot of times when we've not seen certain dynamics done in our own life experiences, we don't know what to expect.
Mhm.
Or we may look at other people's situation and think that ours might mirror that, and it doesn't. So I thought to myself after the fact, it took courage to walk away from guaranteed resources, from a team of people that I thoroughly enjoyed working with, from just a really good setup for myself. And that's tough
It
when
is.
you're left with question marks moving forward.
Yeah, and I would say that that's probably one of the things at the top of the list that most people really have to consider very carefully. Is you're moving from a place where you pretty much have some level of security, and we know
Yes,
that nothing is 100% guaranteed when it comes to employment, but you still at least have um, the foundation or the protection per se of
right.
going to a job, doing your work and knowing that you're going to get paid, whether that's on a biweekly or bi-monthly schedule. You're going to get that check if you show up and you do a decent job. Whereas
That's right.
it might not translate in the same way when you go into self-employment.
Exactly right. And I forgot to add something very important, which is of great significance to most families, especially younger families, medical care. That was also something, that was one of the great benefits of working at that time. And so it was a lot of what could be left behind versus a lot what could be in front of me.
Yeah. So that's the reality of
Hmm.
a decision with those types of ramifications. Not only
Yes.
you go from having a steady income, but
Hmm.
potentially lose the insurance, the benefits that would come along with full time employment. And we know that the benefits, those are not cheap when you have to pay for them on your own.
Not at all. And let's not leave out 401k
Ex-
and the pensions. So it's a lot on the line.
Yeah, so that's, I think that those are really important. And it strikes me that you mentioned faith. You learned more about being a woman of faith as you went through that particular crossroad, because it does take faith, uh, faith and trusting that God is going to be the one who will, help you through whatever might
Amen.
come your way. Because I think that we've all been conditioned to some degree
Hmm.
to go to school, graduate high school, matriculate into college, get a degree, go work for someone.
Hmm.
Okay, that's great. And I have a lot of respect for that. But
Yes.
I think that we shouldn't allow what we shouldn't allow fear to prevent us from going down the road of entrepreneurship if we really think that that's the avenue that's best for us. But we have to
Absolutely.
be careful, if we're considering doing that, what else is going to be affected if we make that choice? And
Yes,
it's not enough to just say, oh, I'm going to up and quit. You have to have a plan.
absolutely.
You
You
know,
must have a plan. If
yeah,
you fail to plan, then you plan to fail.
it's true. That's one of those sayings that we don't hear often enough, but when you do hear it, it's poignant, and I
Hmm.
remember things like that. Um, because you never want to find yourself in a situation where you go from a really good position,
Hmm.
at a decent organization. Maybe you like the people you work with. Sometimes maybe you don't, but you still
Hmm.
consider, what are the consequences of me making this decision today?
Absolutely. And sometimes it's a domino effect of things, in fact. Excuse me, I've got to take a sip of water.
Hey, I understand. Okay, so let's jump to some other questions, and let's talk about the freedom that entrepreneurship provides.
The freedom that
Yeah, how would you qualify that? I think a lot of people might have the perception that if you're self-employed, you can make your own schedule, you'll have more time. Have you found that to be the case? Do you think First, do you think that that's a myth? How has that applied to you? Do you Have you found that you've had more time or more freedom?
I don't know if the freedom that comes with self-employment is a myth, but to me, dare I say, it could be a fairy tale. The the reason I say it that way is because we tend to look at entrepreneurs that we may see on the social media platforms and think, "Oh my goodness, they're making all of these millions of dollars per year, they get to vacation, etc." Well, we should know that's the highlight reels of their life. That's typically not the day in and day out. And I'm talking the legitimate ones, not the scammers,
Yeah.
obviously. But it's been my experience that self employment works well for me at this phase in life because I enjoy the variables in the day and the work schedule. Most people don't work like that. In fact, most people will not thrive in those environments because unless you are a highly structured and highly organized individual, when you don't have someone to be accountable to other than yourself and your bill collectors, it's a recipe for disaster. And also, you have to manage so many moving parts in the initial phases and startup where you might wear five or six hats. And so you're the jack of all trade, but master of none.
Mm,
And that can cause extreme burnout to a lot of people. And so I feel like I work 24/7. There's times where I have a lot of free time, and there's other times where I wish that there were more hours in a day so I could accomplish the things that I need. In fact, I made a comment last week to someone, I'm not even sure if it were you or not, but I said, I had the busiest week, but I didn't feel productive. And in fact, I knew I wasn't productive because my work spoke to it not being productive, but I was busy doing other stuff. And it all related to work, but it wasn't the higher pay things that I needed to get off my books. And I'm saying that to say this: just because we are busy does not mean we're productive. And when you're an entrepreneur, you have to be sure to discern the two because your time, there's always something vying for your time. And it's up to you, and which is why you've got to be highly organized in order to see where's my time best spent. Is there really freedom here? The only way that we get freedom as an entrepreneur is to get proper systems in place. Because if we see that we are doing something repetitiously, yet we've created no system for it, we're wasting time. We're not able to build and move forward and build out maybe one extra thing on our program or something new. And then we can start scaling business, right? And so my thought is, I feel like I work all the time, but I enjoy it at the same time because of some of the opportunities that's been a blessing to me in the process. One day I might be able to help someone, the next day someone may be able to help me.
yeah.
And again, that goes back to being a woman of faith. God will send the people that you need at the right time, but it's up to you to be accountable to yourself. And guess what? If you're not accountable to yourself, guess who you will be accountable to? Your bill collectors.
Mhm. They're always wanting to collect.
Every 30 days, they will remind you, oh, you did or did not do what you were supposed to do this
Mhm.
month. And so when things aren't working, you've got to say, hey, I've really got to buckle down and get on my A game here. You know, it's you versus you.
I think that that's a stark reminder too. Is there's a dark side to entrepreneurship.
Mm-hmm.
Think most people, like you said, they don't get to hear much about it because it looks so glamorous on television, on social media, in the movies, whatever the case may be. It all sounds great until you
Mm-hmm.
start putting some organization and some structures in place. You have to be an excellent time manager. You have to be very organized, very methodical, and calculating about how you spend your time, how you spend your
Mm-hmm.
money, and you also have the compliance and regulatory environments that you might have to meet depending on the type of
Mm-hmm.
business that you're in. So there's so many factors that fall into, uh, should I or shouldn't I proceed with this? You have to
Right.
consider very carefully what it is
Yes.
that you intend to do because, like you said, you're going to be accountable to someone. And
Mm-hmm.
if you're not accountable to an employer, okay, well, you might be accountable to Uncle Sam, you might be accountable to the state, you might be
Yes.
accountable to a whole host of other people because you still have bills to pay.
Absolutely. And I actually want to speak a little bit more to that if we have time.
Well, please do.
Okay, one of the things that, again, because of the social media influence and impact on people's just paradigm on self employment, they think that it's the holy grail of doing business and livelihood. In fact, most successful entrepreneurs have failed multiple times. And I think that's the dark side that most people don't speak to. A lot of self employed people and successful entrepreneurs have lost lots of money, burned lots of time. However, I like to think of it like this: it's not really a loss if you learned from it. Now,
Yeah.
if you didn't learn from it, then it definitely can be a loss. But I feel like God allows us to go through those seasons as a lesson or a blessing, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so we can take those lessons and turn them into the blessing, what will set the stage for us to go ahead and start rising up out of those ashes when we feel that we've been burned or everything is burned around us.
Agreed. Agreed. I think that that's so helpful to be reminded of those things. And so I'm glad that you elaborated on that a little bit more for us.
Hmm, no problem.
This has been very interesting just to kind of get some of your insight because again we've talked about a couple of things that are so important when it comes to considering which track might be most suitable for us.
Mhm.
We don't really want people to be uninformed when they're making
Mhm.
decisions because everything matters when you're determining what you're going to do in regards to your livelihood. Because not only does it impact you, if you have a family, it impacts
Mhm.
that. Uh, it impacts everything that you pretty much touch because you got to have money
That's
in order
right.
to pay your bills, in order to eat, in order to get the appropriate clothing that you need. So
Mhm.
we just have to be very hyper aware when we're
Right.
with making these types of decisions.
Okay, and to your point, you've got to have money. I like to say it like this: money's not everything, but it's just as important as air.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you go without it, it's going to choke you out, right?
Yeah.
But also, if one is deciding if entrepreneurship is a good path for them, one thing that I really recommend is having a huge sense of self awareness.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to self discover, and you have to be brutally honest with yourself and ask yourself, am I one that can get up at 5 a.m. and do work if needed? Can I stay at my office until 8 p.m. because that's what the role calls for? There's so many things that we have to be honest with ourselves. And a good way to start, if a person works in a standard work environment and they get the what they call them, where the employers Y'all check off the list, the reviews. So
Oh, yeah.
take your reviews. Yes. Hopefully they're not getting written up. But if they are, that's okay because we all need that constructive criticism. And in fact, if you cannot take constructive criticism from an employer, I'm going to go out on a limb and say you probably should not enter into self employment because you are the face of whatever brand you have until that brand is more well recognized. And I'll tell you what, thrusting yourself out in the public eye can get you more criticism than anything because criticism is fast off of people's lips for some reason, and compliments is very rare. So if you're someone who can't handle being the front person, I would just say automatically go work a standard job because that in itself can be a little complicated.
I think that that's helpful too that you mentioned that because to it's easy to be bombarded, I guess, with a lot of
Hmm.
publicity on social media that makes everything look like, oh, it's going to go great. All you have to do is follow this 5-step formula, and it's going to be voila, you're going to have millions of dollars, blah, blah, blah. But what happens the first time somebody tells you they don't like your product? They didn't like
Absolutely.
the smell, they didn't like the way it tasted, they didn't like the way it looked. I mean, it could be a
Hmm.
whole things that they can tell you that are, they might not necessarily be negative because those are preferences for those people.
Right.
If you're interested in serving those people and providing them
Hmm.
something they want and that you are trying to say and convey to them that they need, well, it behooves you to listen to what they're saying to you and take that feedback. But like you said, if you're not one who can accept that level of feedback, if you can't
Hmm.
under the purview or under the scope of it as an employed person, well,
Right.
you have a problem if somebody tells you that, if you're trying to serve them as an entrepreneur, because
Oh,
people have all
absolutely.
kinds of ideas and they are more than willing to share with you their opinions, as we clearly see.
Absolutely. And I think it should be mentioned to your point is when you're an entrepreneur, you by proxy become a sales and marketing team
Yes, you.
until you can afford one. And that in itself, if you can't accept no as an answer and you get deflated and defeated, whether you have a product or service, you will fail.
That's right. That's right. So I'm really glad that we had this conversation and that we're taking uh, the path that we're taking because there are so many different facets of it, and so
Hmm.
we have to have a part two for you
Yes.
to come back so that we can explore some other avenues of this conversation because again, all of these things are connected. How you potentially perform as an employee may be
Hmm.
um, it may be, I guess, a view into how you might perform as an entrepreneur. And again, recognizing that there are a whole host of factors that would influence one over the other.
Hmm.
But, it's important to have the discussion and to think
Absolutely.
things. And so for those who are listening and or watching, we just want to have an awareness. We want you to be informed about uh, the decisions that you're making and what brought you to you know, the crossroads. You don't want to be hasty when you're making a decision about your livelihood because it can have some severe ramifications for you. So we just want you to be hyper aware of that to some degree. So, it's been a little bit of time here, and so we're going to go ahead and head for the close. And
Okay.
so to ask you, uh, what kind of advice would you give someone who's standing at a crossroads that might have been similar to yours?
Advice that I would give standing in the crossroads would be there's wisdom in a multitude of counselors. That's from the Bible. And so if you are unsure, seek people that are in positions that you'd like to be in. Pray about it and ask God which direction to go. He'll give you peace in your heart about which direction to go. And sometimes He's gracious enough to even send you a few signs, right? But also, to that end, we can't have analysis paralysis. Sometimes we will overthink a thing in such a way that we've missed the boat.
Hmm.
And we don't want to do that either because it is better to get started and make a few mistakes along the way than to never get started and have a shoulda, woulda, coulda at
That's,
the end.
that's right. That
Mhm.
is very sound advice.
Thank
Very.
you.
So I'm glad that I asked about that. So as we do close, uh, tell us where we can find information about you or how we can support you in your endeavors with your foundation.
You can support us and find me at thejamesboothfoundation.com is www.jamesboothfoundation, or excuse me, I said .com.org. You can see I'm getting tired here. Need my coffee. jamesboothfoundation.org is where you can find us, and we would love for you guys to come out, volunteer, support us in any way that you can. And we look forward to seeing good things on this podcast.
Right on, right on. So I'm so glad that you decided to come and join me today. And again, hopefully we'll have the opportunity to sit down and have another chat and explore it a little further than we did. So we're going to go ahead and shut it down today. I'm appreciative of everyone who's taken the time to listen to what we had to say today. Take to heart some of the things that you've heard and carefully consider and even pray about it. The things that you want to do next. You have options, and that's what you need to be aware of, is that you have options, and you want to talk to someone that you can trust, and just do some assessments and some evaluations on your skill set. And we're going to explore all of these things as we continue walking this path of this podcast. So until next time, subscribe and like and share this podcast so that we can grow those who we impact. And we will see you soon.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
I enjoy being your guest. I appreciate the opportunity. Thanks.